insensitive to students, then you would not survive there. And as a researcher, I had to make sure that I showed to the teachers and the students that I was culturally sensitive to them, that I was linguistically sensitive to them. My Spanish, I try to use it because that's what really the school valued. People who show interest in the student languages. I mean, it was mostly Spanish in that context, but if you go to another school, maybe it will be Vietnamese, it will be Chinese, or whatever that is. But even though you don't speak the language, but you need to show respect, right? So that's part of it. That was part of the school culture. So these are the first steps that I would keep in mind if I'm doing research. And it all comes down to one thing: context. The context is key. If you're going to do research, you need to know the context in which you're going to do research. What's the context, right? That's very important. If you don't know the context, then you're going to end up encountering many challenges, many obstacles. So far, any questions so far? Yes?
What do you mean about context?
Okay. Context is everything. Context is everything. For example, if you're gonna do, I'm interested in doing a study looking at how students who are in the dual programs, bilingual Spanish and English, succeed at learning both languages or not. So now, if I'm gonna do that research in the school, I need to know the context of the school. What's the history of the dual program? Context is it. What's the history of the dual program in Massachusetts? Has it been a successful experience for both teachers and students? That's the context, right? Who are involved in these programs?
Okay, setting the background.
Setting.
Okay.
That's the context. And who's involved in this program? Is it predominantly Mexicans or Chinese, versus monolingual speakers? So that will be the context. Okay, it varies from place to place. Okay, I'm interested also in doing research on accentism. Accentism. It's the ism that sometimes we don't talk much about, like how people are misunderstood, misread, misinterpreted, prejudged based on how they speak.
That's what the play My Fair Lady was all about.
Right, right.
She was judged by her accent.
Her accent. So I need to know the context in which am I gonna interview people who are college students as opposed to high school? What will be the context? Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So this is what it is. The set. And what shapes the set. Yes?
I have a question about context, I think. So let's say your example of you're looking at dual language schools and whether they're equally learning English and Spanish. So would you go in and interview people or understand that context before you start thinking of your research questions, or?
No.
In the context.
Yeah, I mean, do you say, okay, it's going to be a process, so I'm going to have my research questions, but then I go in and I might have to change them?
Oh,
Based on-
most
I don't
likely
know, I mean,
that does thing happen. Well, it all depends on your epistemology. In other words, how do you believe knowledge is constructed? Do you think that I am the researcher, I'm the one with the knowledge, and I'm going to go into the schools and pour the knowledge into the head of the teachers? Now, if I were to do research in that context, in that setting, you need to have something in mind as a researcher. You cannot go into the school without having anything. Although some people prefer to go there and explore and see what happens. And their research question will emerge from what they observe. Or you can have your research questions beforehand. You go into the setting, and then the data will determine whether or not you should change your research questions.
Either one is still considered qualitative.
That's
in
correct.
nature.
That's correct. I like to, personally, when I was doing I've been doing quality research for about, 9 years now. I usually don't have a specific questions in mind. I will go into the classroom and observe, take field notes, and then based on what I observe, based on what emerged from my data, then I come up with the questions. Okay. I think it's more organic that way. But some people they would have to have a set of questions before they go in to guide them through the process. That usually the way people do it. That's the basically the standard way, so to speak. People should have a set of questions, research questions, and they go to the school, whatever the setting may be. Then they start collecting data, analyzing the data, so on and so forth. Then they will decide whether or not they should change their research questions or not. In most cases, people do change their research questions because there is no way you can predict what you're gonna see happening, what's gonna happen in the classroom setting. There is no way. So you have to go there with an open mind and then just, based on our observation, based on the field notes, the interview that you do with the teachers, and based on the interview with the students, and then you figure out whether or not your research questions can help you. Your data can help you, your research can help you, achieve your goal as a researcher. But usually the data that you're going to collect will force you in some way to readjust your research questions. So, does that, yes?
Would your prior knowledge also contribute to that? For instance, if you had already been in an environment, in a community, and you have been living in that community, so you already are developing some ideas of what the problem is before you actually start the formal research, and so you may go in a little bit more with some directed questions.
So you will have an insider perspective, because you are already part of the, let's just say community, you're part of the community already, instead of know what's going on. And that's a challenge that people face when they are doing research with people belonging to the same community as they are. For example, if I were to go into Haitian community on here, as much as I'm aware of my biases might influence how I approach the Haitian student, the Haitian teachers, or if they are, the teachers are Haitian, given my ethnic perspective. Does that make sense? So it's really challenging doing research in your own community, because when I say community, I'm not referring that you have to be Haitian. I mean, you can become part of a community. I have somehow become part of the Native American community here because I have so many friends who are Native. They invite me to feast and we dance. I don't dance. I observe them dancing. So I have a sense, right? Now, if I'm going to do research, I have to really examine my biases. I have to make sure that I do not allow my preconceived ideas influence how I conduct the research, how I collect the data, how I interview people, what kind of question that I ask. So it's really challenging when you are doing research on a community of which you are part of or you are familiar with.
As Wendy with the math situation, I mean, that's 80% of her life. And so if she wants to do research, she would probably want to do something that's closely related with her work. And for her to go outside of that.
No, she doesn't have to. You can, you can document your own.
You know what I mean? Like, she's been in that,
right.
So she's going to have some direction on what she wants to do her qualitative research on.
Right.
You get my point?
But again, that would depend on her goals, what goals she sets for herself, and what is available there. I mean, sometimes you go into the setting to do research, and you have all these expectations, you have all these preconceived ideas, but you don't know what you're gonna have, what can you work with, because as a researcher, you work with what you have. For example, perhaps your goal was to interview 50 people, but they are not available, you end up interviewing 5 people. So you work with what you have. Now, in her case, if she's gonna do research in your little world, right? You're gonna have to do what I would call a lot of self-reflexivity, right? You're gonna have to do a lot of self-reflexivity because you need to really question your expectations, even your preconceived ideas. Because you might think you know everything that's going on there, but you don't. It's not until when you actually start doing the research, you start collecting data, then you will find out many things that perhaps you were not even aware of. Because remember, if you're just a member of a community, there are questions that you do not ask. You do not investigate because you take things for granted. But once you become a researcher, your job is to investigate. It's not to take anything for granted, not to believe anything at face value. You really need to dig into what you're doing. If she were to do her research there, I can guarantee you she will find out many things that perhaps she never thought were happening in that community.
Because like what you're saying is that your prior knowledge could almost work against you because you
It
take
can.
things for granted or, yeah.
Yeah.
That makes sense.
And then you have to change heart. Change them. Now you're a researcher, you be a researcher. And then you need to let your participant know that you are no longer the system that they play with your researcher. And you need to lay out your agenda. What's the agenda? We all have agenda, right? And then that way you know exactly, what you're trying to do. Does that make sense? And then it will all depend on what approach you use. Okay. Any other questions before I move to the second step?
What is EMIC?
EMIC is when you are part of a group. The knowledge you require, the first-hand knowledge you require, you have access to, that's part of your EMIC perspective. You are part of it. You are like when you are inside it.
Okay.
Okay?
I have the opposite too. Earlier I had
Yeah.
wrote down that you're not part of the group, for example, in Native American culture. Is it
That's
part
what
of
I
it
did.
or it's not part of it?
When I was referring to that,
IMIC.
EMIC is when you're part of it.
You are part
Part
of
of
it.
it, yeah.
So for example, if you were Native American and you wanted to do research, then you're IMIC because you're
Because
part
you-
of
yeah.
that group.
Mhm.
Okay. And I don't-
Now you bring your EMIC perspective. You're inside of it.
Okay.
All right? Does that make sense? Your research goal. I mean, the second step. I'm just walking you through the list, but like I said, they are all intertwined. You don't have to do A, B, C, and D. It all depends how you want to do it. Some people, they don't want to find out about anything. You just go in there and explore. But me personally, if I'm going to do research at the school, I'm going to go online and get some basic information. I'll talk to people who teach at the school that have a sense. For example, in 2 years from now, I want to do research with black and brown boys. I want to see how they do in school. Black born boys. But there aren't too many blacks on here, right? So if I'm interested in doing this research, I'm gonna talk to some black students or black teachers who teach black kids to have a sense before I even start doing it. But others would not do that. Some people would just go into the school and find out as they go. But personally, I believe it's important to get, very basic information about the school, about the people that you're gonna be doing your research with before you even go there. That's me. But other people would approach it differently, but that's just how I see it myself. Then you have the purpose. Once you identify the problem, right? Once you know what you want to do, then you need to have a purpose. What's the purpose? What is the goal? Okay? And your goal needs to be linked to your research questions. Okay? So your research questions, like I said, they evolve as you go. Once you collect all your data, right? You start analyzing data, you might realize that your research questions don't fit. And you have to change them, you have to modify them, right? You cannot, when you are doing research, you cannot have anything static. Because research is special, particularly quality research is very fluid. There's nothing static about it. Because it evolves from day to day, right? So you have the purpose, the research questions, right? And the research questions will, in a way, determine what methodology you should use. Now, let me make it clear. Some people use methodology and methods interchangeably. Although they are intertwined, but they are not the exact same thing. Methods, like I put in this, is basically the tools that you use, the techniques that you use to collect data. For example, it depends what kind of research you are doing, what is available to you as well. I usually use focus group interviews to collect data. I use formal and informal interviews, with my participants, with the teachers. And I also use field notes. Field notes, I sit in the classroom observing student-student interaction, teachers-teachers interaction, and based on what I observe. Now, what you observe, does it necessarily reflect the reality? Because it's all subjective, right? It's all about your perception. And how you observe, how you take field notes is informed by your epistemology, by your belief, by your philosophical belief, right? So let's say Ahmed and I, two men of color, we go into the classroom, right? And I'm working with middle class students from different, racial and background, right? So my positionality as a researcher, positionality means my gender, race, and my philosophy, my belief, will somehow influence how I take my field notes, what I select, what I include in my field notes, right? Something might be held in the corner. I don't think it's important to me, but it might be important to Hamed, right? So it all depends on what you have in mind. What's the purpose? What exactly are you looking for? Okay? What's your goal? Are you interested in knowing how student and student interaction impact teachers' learning? Does that make sense? The way students interact with one another, how this type of interaction informs and impact the teaching practices of the teacher. How do teachers respond to student interaction, or vice versa? Then if you're interested in that, then you're going to focus on student interaction. Now, you can also focus on the teacher, right? How does the teacher interact with the student? What choices the teacher makes when he or she interacts with the teacher, the students?